From Animal to Advocate, part two of my interview with Mark McYoung. Now, before we get into that, please go to surviveviolence.com, sign up for the free masterclass. This is how we keep in touch with you. This is how you make sure that you keep hearing from subject matter experts like the ones that I interview. Okay. Let me get here. There you go. Mark McYoung. Now, we had finished the first part where we got a little bit of his history. He got his nickname, The Animal. The violence that he grew up with, the violence that he started to learn about, he started to share with people. Now, we ended it right when he was about to go over his 5 truths when it comes to self-defense and violence. And he'll get into that and then unpack a bunch of other stuff. What's really interesting is, Mark's transition into, being an advocate for people that have been, that have used self-defense as a defense for some violence that they did. And if you don't understand why I'm saying it that way, I think this interview will really elaborate on that. And the idea that, hey, you may think it's called self-defense. Self-defense is a legal term. What you do is you're using violence, and then it gets determined how it's used, meaning the law will sit there and say, okay, this is an act of violence. It's never okay, but let's look at the facts. If the facts suss out your way, it will be determined self-defense and justified. If not, you're going to have to deal with the criminal side of things. Mark is very clear about that. And he also is going to give you some insights in the upcoming, this whole thing is a 4-part deal. But you're going to learn by the end of this interview what to say and what not to say. A lot of things you've been told are not correct. And I learned a lot in this interview. All right, so let's get into part 2.
Like, I came up with 5 stages of violent crimes. Okay. Weird story on how that was done. I was teaching a self-defense class, and there was this little bunny foo-foo. To this day, the memory of this woman makes my teeth itch. Okay. And she came up and she was like, well, if somebody does this, what do I do? And I said, you do this. And she was like, oh, no, I couldn't do that.
Right.
I'm like, well, then you can do this. Oh, no, I couldn't do that. Right. Now I'm getting pissed.
Right.
All right. And I said, well, you better not get mugged then. And she goes, how do I do that? And I said, you look for this, 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 and this. And she went, okay. And she popped away. And I was like, you stupid bunny, you. I stopped, turned, and went, whoa, what did I just say? Right? Because I'd broken down the process of these are the things that if crime is going to happen, you will see these elements. Okay? It's kind of like going to somebody's house. Originally, there's a lot of ways to get there, but the closer you get to your destination, the more you have to turn here, the more you have to turn there. Okay? What I'd seen over the years, and I'd learned to recognize were the patterns in these road markers, if you will. And that's the sort of stuff that subconsciously, if you have experience, okay, you can spot it. Well, you need to bring it up to consciousness because, number one, so you see it, you know what to do, what works as a counter. But if things still go sideways, you're going to have to explain it to the cops. Right?
Yep.
Now, that's the latest stage is I've largely moved away from teaching physical stuff, and I'm now working with legal and articulation of, how did you know that you were about to get robbed? Well, anytime an attorney asks you that, heads up, you're being set up for a trap.
Right.
Okay. Number one, you don't have to know that you were being set up. But you do have to have a reasonable belief based on prior knowledge that because you were seeing 1, 2, 3, that is usually indicative of this pattern. and you have to be able to explain it. Okay, because if you don't, the lawyer, well, first of all, the cops are going to arrest you, but the prosecuting attorney is going to rip you apart. So a lot of what people talk about, with, oh, do this when it comes to dealing with the law. Well, Wolfgang Pauli once said, that's not only not right, but that's not even wrong.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's one of the things that I'm really working on now is between teaching people, first of all, how to recognize the stuff so you can avoid it
Right.
and counter it. And then explain afterwards when you're dealing with a system that wants to throw you into the meat grinder. Okay. Plus working on cases where people actually use this stuff and, doing damage control.
You touched upon something with this that I think is really huge. You talked about the woman, the bunny that you were talking about, and how her reaction. I came to the realization probably about 10 years ago that myself, anybody gets it up to the instructor level, anybody that we're the minority by far. We're like that really, really small group that actually likes the stuff enough to immerse our lives into it and then also teach it.
Fascinating subject, and we're fascinated by it.
Yeah, exactly. And what's interesting though is like I thought everybody was like that. In the old days, when you're like an evangelist. You're out there, oh, you got to do this, you got to do it this way. When I came to the realization, which is really what that woman was telling you, was, well, I mean, I'm assuming it was this approach, is that most people don't want to learn self-defense, call it whatever you want. But what they want to learn is, how can I live a life that minimizes the chance I'd ever need it? And I'm seeing that a lot of what you're providing right now is giving people really good, I get questions all the time. How can I do this? How can I do this? They avoid exactly what you're talking about right now. You could get more benefit from immersing yourself in what you are doing right now as a civilian, and have a much better understanding and a much better chance of actually minimizing violence coming into your life, because you understand the subject so much better without even physically training. You can arrange your life in such a way that you could really minimize the chance of it coming in. And I find that actually really fascinating now when we come into that.
To what you just said, yes, 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 and did I mention yes?
Yes.
Okay. Here's where we run into some really weird. Okay, I used to do, before COVID, what I called lunchtime lectures. And that is, I'd go to a company, and during their lunchtime, I'd give a lecture about crime avoidance. And the trick I would do is I'd open the thing, I'd pick somebody in the audience and said, what are the chances of me walking in, sitting down at your desk, and not only doing your job, but doing it better than you? Now, naturally, there was always a smart ass who said, yeah, pretty good, right?
Yeah,
but
right.
Most people got the idea, and it's like, no. And it's like, yeah, starting with fact, I don't even know what you do, right?
Right.
And they're like, yeah, see, you wouldn't know how to do my job. And then I flip it around and say, so what makes you think you're not only going to be able to do a criminal's job, but do it better than him? He is a professional. He makes his living doing this. Right?
Right.
And that was a beginning of awareness of, hey, these people are out of your league. You cannot win playing their game. Therefore, don't play the game. I give you permission to walk away.
Exactly.
Right? There is no loss of face. Walking away is not a pride issue. Okay? And that's where you really run into the main thing. Getting them past the belief that they have to be able to do this. I'm a competent person. I can handle this. A stupid criminal, I can beat him. It's like, no, 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 no. And I mean, it's funny because it's a harder pill to swallow than it should be. Now, mind you, I have run fiercely. Okay. I mean, there have been times where professionally I had to stay, but there have been other times where I start counting one, two, three. I'm out of here.
Right.
Okay. Um, but there are also times that I've bailed, hard professionally, like, you know, carrying a 5-shot pistol and having 50 guys who wanted my blood. Okay. It's time to go.
Yeah.
Okay. There is no loss of face. There is no, well, I should do that.
Mm.
Right? You got to be analytical about this. If you let pride and emotion get involved, that's where you start making mistakes. Now, a lot of people want a guaranteed move. They want something, you just do this,
Right.
right? Which, when it comes to violence, there really isn't such a thing. So,
Mm.
overcoming that desire, right? Um, especially you just do this that is action packed, right? Oh, I just want to know, do I kick him in the nuts? It's like,
Yeah.
don't, you'll just make him mad. Um, you know, but they don't want the you just do this, which is, yeah, you just shut up and turn around and walk away,
Right.
right? No, 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 my pride, right? Well, this kind of goes back to, what we were talking about, or we briefly touch upon, which is, you had Rory Miller online on this podcast, and he talked about social and asocial violence,
Yes.
which, God, I love that model. I took my model, threw it out the window, and stole his. Um, One of the things is people really only have experience with social violence and only a limited spectrum. Okay. They don't understand when they're dealing with something else. And once you understand when you're dealing with something else, then it's like, oh, shift gears, because the rules of social violence don't apply here. A different set of rules apply, right? And they don't want to learn the rules. They don't want to look into the subject to understand that you need, when I talk about a mugger is looking at you as if you were an ATM with legs. That's it. You're not even human to them. Okay. They're like, actually, I have a story about this. I was doing a radio interview with this woman, um, and I was telling her that if the guy gets a drop on you, let him rob you. Okay, that's the safest strategy. Robbery has a script. Follow the script. Okay, break the script at your own peril. Well, she was like, well, okay, is there anything I can say that lets him know how upset I am with the fact that he's mugging me? This was before I got nothing. But I was just like, and I said, no, that's going to get you in trouble. That's going to get you shot.
Yeah.
And just ask Nicole Dufresne, right, whose last words on it to a guy who just pistol whipped her boyfriend, was waving a gun at them, and it's like, you got what you wanted. What are you going to do now? Shoot us?
Yep.
Well, yeah, now that you asked.
Yeah.
But she's arguing with me, and then she was, well, let's take the next caller. The next caller is like, I was an ex-gang member. He's right. If you said something to me, I'd kill you. Right? And she goes,
They can't fathom that because they see everything from their perspective. They
Yes.
they think they don't understand. Guess what? This guy doesn't have any of your background.
Nope.
We would say stuff like, "Hey, well, to get through the people, I would always say, when was the last time you took a knife, put it to somebody's neck, and asked them for their watch and wallet? Like, never." And it's like, okay, so you probably have no idea what's going on in that guy's brain since you can't do it. So,
Right. Right.
it's just so it's crazy though. I mean, we're laughing about it, but this is real. People really think that they're going to have some sort of an interaction here.
Yes. Yes. It's beyond real. It is it's not understanding the danger exists. Right? That you have your priorities, and people from nice, safe backgrounds have a totally different set of priorities than people from violent backgrounds. And, thinking, we talk about entitlement a lot in our teaching. I mean, Jenna Meek and I. The sense of entitlement that I have the right to share my feelings and my opinions, right? I don't know if you've ever talked to Peyton Quinn.
No, I have not.
Okay.
I know of him and I have followed his stuff. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh,
That's on me. I should know better.
I had a note that says turn off the phone.
I know. What an idiot. No, I do know Peyton. I know his work and everything. And the guy's, just obviously just one of the originals also in your group
Yeah,
of
wonderful
people.
guy. He's fallen off the face of the earth, and I haven't heard from him in a while. But I have one of my favorite photos is my wife sitting on his couch, and she's just curled up and just happy as a clam, holding his AK-47 as she's chatting with him. Right? And it's like, you're too happy in that photo, But yeah, she calls him Mr. Mole. Well, Peyton came up with 4 rules that he actually modified later to 5 because people kept on doing the dumb with him. And I added one more. So I call it Peyton's 5+1. Okay. And these are really simple rules. And that is when dealing with a violent person, do not insult him, right? Do not make references about his testicles on his mom's chin. Just don't do it. Do not challenge him. Okay, what you gonna do? Do not threaten him. I'm gonna kick your ass. All right. His 4th one is don't deny it's happening, and that's a big one for civilians.
That's a huge one.
Yeah, it is.
Glad you brought that up.
I got a story. Remind me to tell you about the filming of Street Safe. The 5th one is give him a face-saving exit. That is a big one. Well, I added one more, which is do not imperiously command. And this one really goes for women.
Yes.
Right? Go away.
Mm-hmm.
And I talk about this as this is not a rude busboy that you can get fired. Okay, and a lot of people treat people from other cultures and lower socioeconomic, and include into this muggers, robbers, and rapists, as if they're uppity busboys. Right? No, don't, do not try and cower this peasant with your attitude. Right? These are really good rules to keep in mind. But here's where we get into problems. When we're adrenalized, we fall into default behaviors and strategies. And a lot of these strategies come from our social class and how we engage in conflict. Okay? This is outside that narrow spectrum of social conflict that you're used to. Okay, so the trick is to recognize when you're dealing with rules different than what you're accustomed to. Because you'll fall into them very quickly if you're not careful. And by the way, then comes the things of like, well, I'd never do that sort of stupid thing. Right? That's why I'm knowing about Nicole Dufresne.
Yeah.
Is, if I could build a time machine and go back to like 2 days, hell, even the afternoon of, and ask her, would you ever be so stupid to say that to an armed man? It's like, no, I'd never be that dumb. But under adrenaline and excitement and emotion, that seems like the brightest idea in the world.
That's the woman that on the Lower East Side was. Yeah, I just a quick aside. I included that in my book.
Yeah.
And the publisher literally argued with me that I needed to put a footnote in saying that, the Lower East Side really isn't that bad now. Isn't that this New York publisher was coming in and saying the whole thing going, I think it's really unfair to color the Lower East Side that way. That was the response to that story. And I mean, it's just the idiocy you're dealing with some people. And that's exactly what you're talking about. This imperious, like, well, I live in the Lower East Side now, so you can't tell a story like that.
Myself, I live in New York.
It was shocking how this person like literally forgot, the whole point of the story, which is what you're talking about, is that people will do these things and not understand what they're dealing with. They don't understand what a predator is like. And thank God that gang member came in on that call of yours to wake her up.
Yeah. But here's the thing. We learn to adapt to the environment we're in. Okay, I'm doing little hand gestures here. We learn to adapt, and we tend to go down that way with our thinking. Okay? This is really just part of life. Now, you're in Vegas, but you mentioned that you were raised bouncing around.
Yes.
In military brat.
Yes.
Once you acclimated to an environment, you knew how to get to the supermarket. Okay, and you just automatically go there. You really didn't have to think about that. Now, do you have to think about how to get to the supermarket from where you live now?
No.
You do it automatically.
Right.
Right? When we go down certain pathways of thinking, these habits become ingrained. Okay, and this is a really good way of making this analogy of when you're living that lifestyle and you're down that way, it is important. You have these priorities, you have these habits, and it's, self-soothing is one of them. Okay, what's the most important thing about this situation? Well, how I feel. Right? And I'm running to that agenda. Okay, so for me, if I'm deep in this agenda, well, people don't talk to me like that. People don't do this to me. If I'm put outside of that, what I'll try and do is operate to these rules. Okay, and I won't even consciously think about it. This will happen faster than conscious thought unless I shift mental gears. See, so it made perfect sense. And I mean, I can argue that according to her lifestyle, talking to people who actually knew Nicole Dufresne, she wasn't a successful, but she was competent at her craft. She was pretty good at what she did, right? She had the respect of her peers. She was well-known, well-liked in her field. Okay. All of these, if she had been challenged inside her field, her reaction would have worked given the rules of that lifestyle. Okay. And she did it without thinking. Right. So people go, yeah, she was stupid. And it's like, no. Mm-mm. She did it out of habit. Okay, she did it while she
was. It had served her. It had served her before in those types of environments.
Exactly. Yeah. In most situations, that strategy worked.
Right.
What didn't happen here is, well, you could say that she was trying to bring the situation from here back to a more normal, right? That she was comfortable with, that she had control in. Okay. And that, trying to get control back verbally in a violent or, potentially violent situation, a lot of times the strategies that you think will get you control back will make it worse.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of problem that if you don't know, you don't say that. Okay, you'll likely think it's a great idea. If you don't know not to do that, you'll think it's a great idea. Like, I've seen young frat boys without, just thinking about it like, hey, you know what I'm going to do as a sign of contempt? I'm going to knock this guy's hat off.
Yeah.
As much as I hate the term, knocking somebody's hat off is what is known as a pre-attack indicator.
Yes.
You're telling this guy you have such contempt for him. Here, this is the level. It's on. Right? I'm not afraid of you. It's on. Don't be surprised that he reacts to it. But people don't know this.
The other thing in this conversation, what I hope people are getting the idea is, oftentimes people always want me to do, the straight up, hey, where do I hit them? Where do I do, show like my targeting videos, where I sit there and show just anatomy and then I'll show a bunch of, injuries that go through. People love that stuff, because it's in there.
Yeah, because it's simple.
It's simple to understand. It's there. But when you talk about these subjects, because this is what the real, everybody I deal with that's experienced violence, these are the things we talk about. Meaning, and I mean victims, victims that come to me and stuff like this. They realize how important this stuff is. You don't have to explain it to them. They get it after the fact. If they've survived it,
right?
They get it. They understand it. But reaching that, I always tell people, like, my mix normally is 70-30. 70% of the people come to me after the fact. 30% somehow are seeing me for some reason, or they're hearing, my presentation, prior to violence coming into
or they're in a violence profession.
Exactly. Yeah. It's coming in. And what's interesting is, this should be more, I learned it obviously because I had to. I moved around a lot. And you're forced into it. And I didn't realize how valuable that was till much later in life. But the politeness too. I mean, I learned that very early on. Here's another thing. The proliferation of the UFC, I think, has been amazing. It's been great for combat sports. It's been really good. The problem is, though, that the thing I liked about what I learned early on, my grandfather was a big boxer. And what I saw early on was, I saw these amazing boxers that were great, but he would always tell the story of the violence behind the ring, meaning, oh yeah, this guy had to throw the fight because they were gonna kill his mom or do other things. Yeah. And so could you just talk a little bit difference? Because there's a real confusion, amongst people. The idea, the difference between, I hate, violence has become a buzzword now. Like, people are using it as like, everybody's doing, everybody's teaching violence now. You were one of the original guys that really, really talked about that. Can you just do a little bit on the difference between violence versus, combat sports and gamification of violence, which I love. I love watching. I'm a huge, obviously I live out here in Vegas. I watch it. I got a lot of friends that are in it. It's great stuff, but the people don't really understand what violence is. Rory talked a little bit about it in our talk, and I thought that was really, really great. But your experience, I mean, just the fact that say you win, by winning a fight, sometimes that's just a start for you. Now you've got real problems because you won the fight, and now you got to deal with his culture coming at you, or his people coming around. People don't think beyond, learning punching and kicking. They think somehow that's the inoculator. And really what you have to do is you have to learn how to deal with people and cultures and your surroundings. And violence is a very different animal than, a competition.
Okay. I think, once again, get in the Peabody, get in the Wayback Machine. Got to step back. Understand, and Jenna Meek and I wrote about this in What You Don't Know Can Kill You, our book about training and what's not in training. Is you have to look at violence as an umbrella concept. And you can break it into 3 distinct stages. There is the precursor to violence. There is the actual physical application. And then there's the aftermath. Now, these days I talk about the legal aftermath, but growing up, I grew up in honor cultures that had vendettas.
Yes.
Okay. You want to know hell on earth? Okay. I mean, if you have a bad enough reputation, the cops walk in and say what happened, and everybody goes, oh, I don't know, man. I was looking at my beer. I didn't see nothing.
Right.
Okay. hell on earth is when they walk in and the guy you just thumped, they ask him what happened. They know who did it.
Mm-hmm.
They know who got thumped. And all they're waiting for word of like, you say this, we'll take this person away. And it's like, so what happened to you? And the guy looks you dead in the eye and goes, I don't know nothing.
That's the start.
Oh man, the next 6 months are gonna suck.
Yeah.
Because this guy and all of his friends and all of his family are going to get involved in righting that wrong that you've done to him.
Right.
Okay. Now, that's difference number one. Okay. There ain't no shake hands after a match.
Right.
Again, going back to the spectrum and breaking things up, what leads up to violence, and there are many, many types of violence, is very, very important as if it's going to even happen, if you can avoid it, how to recognize what level it's going to be. Okay. And that, by the way, is something that a whole lot of people don't understand, right? I am way less concerned about the guy who is yelling and barking and howling,
Mm-hmm.
right, than I am the dude who's very quietly walking up, does a weapons check and a witness check as he's coming up. Okay, that last guy's going to be a problem if he gets close. Okay, so all of this stuff, huge, huge subject of what happens before. Okay, then you have the physical, and there are some complications there, but then you get the aftermath. And the reason I break them into these three stages is what happened here is more important in the legal aftermath than really what happened here.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, sure, you've got excessive force, et cetera, and all these other problems, justifying that level of force. But right here is where the danger is. So, people go, yeah, UFC, I know this stuff already, right? And, one of the things that I talk about is take any mixed martial arts match, put them in street clothes, and put them in a bar. What do you call that? That was a question.
A melee. I mean, that's just it. That's just it's two guys on the ground and you pile on.
Okay, believe it or not, there's a lot of punching and kicking that goes on before it goes to the ground.
Right.
Yeah. But the other word for that is a fight.
Yeah, bar fight. Yeah, or fight. Yeah.
Here's the thing: self-defense is legal, fighting is illegal.
Right. Thank you. That's where I was getting at. Is the idea of from a legal standpoint, Mark, and you're far more competent, at this than me. Could you walk people through what are the biggest mistakes or biggest misconceptions, you're probably going there, that people have when it comes to self-defense in the eyes of the law coming in? I find most people, one of two things happens. Either you've got the rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6 guys, or then you have the other guys who go way overboard. They scare the living shit out of people to the point to where they're afraid to take action in any way, shape, or form. So there's that sweet spot that I think is really relevant. And I know everything is jurisdictional overall, but are there some overall principles that people need to be aware of? Okay, and that's another great place to stop, because that's where Mark will pick up tomorrow, is where you're at now. You saw his 5 stages of violence that he went through. We talked about a lot of stuff in there. I hope you've picked up some things. That the point he made about mixed martial arts matches, if they were put in street clothes and put into a street setting or a bar setting or anything like that, what would we call that? And it came down to a fight, a bar fight, whatever you want to term. What's interesting is Mark's point of, in self-defense, fighting is never justified. And that means 2 willing participants that go in. So What he's about to go into tomorrow is really the crux of his work now. What do you have to do? How do you need to conduct yourself in the real world if the potentiality for violence is coming? You know, everybody knows how we look at it here, you know, on this channel, you know, and my stand on it. But what's going to be really nice is to have somebody give you, you know, who's in court all the time arguing these things, and helping people, you know, come up with effective defenses. He's going to be able to share with you what not to do. And again, I can't, you know, more strongly recommend his book, you know, What You Don't Know Can Kill You. It's an excellent book. And, you know, Mark's just an excellent source. He also has No Nonsense Self-Defense is one of his websites. That is just a treasure trove of just his writings and just really great, you know, just a great source for this type of material. Also, his professional is markmcyoung.com. That's for his legal advocacy and how he puts together, works with defense teams for people that have used self-defense and they're fighting the charges that have been placed on them. So again, I think these next two things are going to be really, really critical to your self-defense, self-protection package overall. That's why I like doing these interviews. I get people who are really good in their areas and they can really help out. And again, I've just enjoyed this so far, and the rest of the interview is outstanding. So anyways, guys, don't forget, surviveviolence.com. Please subscribe to the channel. Please add to notification bells and make your comments. That's what helps grow this channel. Until next time, stay safe.